Hi friends, are man-made calcium supplements the surest path to stronger bones? Why do I know so many people who, despite taking calcium supplements, still fracture their bones? Is breast milk from a cow the best way to build your bones? Yeah, if you're a cow. People aren't cows. I knew a friend who was 63 years old. She actually broke her wrist one day slipping on a step. Ironically, she was carrying a gallon of milk at the time because she was told that she needed to drink it every day. But her DEXA scan, after it came back, she realized she was still getting severe osteopenia despite drinking that dairy milk. So dairy didn't save her bones. After this video, your entire viewpoint of calcium will change. What about having a heart attack or having kidney stones? Why aren't people just eating foods rich in calcium? Maybe because, unfortunately, even though many foods have calcium, it doesn't mean that they are actually in the right form for your body and bones. So let's talk about the top 10 whole food bone supporting supplements that not only provide calcium, but also other things that your bone needs to grow. Let's take prunes. Prunes actually preserve hip bone mineral density in postmenopausal women. And this was shown by eating 50 grams of prunes daily. That's about 5 or 6 prunes in a day. And by eating prunes, you can also decrease your fracture risk. And year-long prune eating slowed age-related bone loss. It costs you like less than $1 a day to eat 6 prunes. How much do you think it costs for you to get HRT? Number 2 is collard greens. One of the most affordable forms of food and calcium is collard greens. Collards provide vitamin K, magnesium, potassium, and there's even vitamin C that synergistically support your osteoblast activity. Number 3 is turnip greens. That is a silent hero. There's almost 200 milligrams of calcium in a cooked cup. And when you eat turnip greens, that modulates inflammation. Chronic inflammation actually drives osteoclast activity, which breaks down bone. And these greens, they calm that process down. How about bok choy? That's a low oxalate cruciferous vegetable with extremely bioavailable calcium. That is a perfect example of a vegetable that offers calcium, hydration, prebiotic fibers, and a healthy gut, all which directly affect your bone metabolism. And we can't forget about kale. Kale's calcium absorption rate is nearly double that of milk. And unlike dairy, kale lowers inflammation and contains vitamin K1, which helps activate osteocalcin, the hormone your bone cells use to attract calcium in the right places. Mustard greens also have calcium, and they're also rich in a sulfur compound that helps you detox. And when your body and your liver detoxifies more efficiently, your hormone balance improves. Your bone has less turnover, especially in menopause. And that's why I eat beans. So navy beans is a great plant-based calcium-rich source. You can pair that with magnesium, potassium, fiber, and resistant starch. And beans, it improves your gut microbiome, and your microbiome, which can contain short-chain fatty acids that reduce bone breakdown. Black-eyed peas are culturally used in longevity regions. They deliver calcium with protein that doesn't overstimulate IGF-1 like animal protein. And that is key because chronic high IGF-1 in adulthood actually accelerates aging pathways, including bone resorption. That's why I eat more almonds. It's not just for a snack. You can eat for breakfast, for lunch. It contains calcium, magnesium, vitamin E, and monounsaturated fats that support cellular membranes. Chia seeds are great for constipation. They are tiny and mighty. They are high in plant-based omega-3s. They have fiber as well as calcium. And when you soak them, they deliver a slow-release mineral matrix that stabilizes blood sugar, which is critical because chronically high glucose accelerates bone breakdown. Now, sesame seeds, especially tahini, has one of the highest calcium sources in the plant kingdom, up to 350 milligrams per 2 tablespoons. And because sesame seeds are rich in lignans and vitamin E, they provide antioxidant protection to your bone tissue. Now, imagine eating these foods daily. Imagine them spread across some soups, some salad, some bowls, some stir fries, or maybe smoothies and dips, or just eating them as a snack by themselves. This is how calcium can be a part of your daily lifestyle rather than isolating these chemicals. Food is how bones should be healing well into our 70s, 80s, and 90s. Think about it. When you eat leafy greens, the calcium enters your bloodstream alongside the magnesium, which prevents calcium from spiking too high and causing damage. And vitamin K1, it actually activates proteins that directly puts calcium into bones. And when you eat whole food plants, you're going to have fiber. That fiber can bind to material in the intestine, and it can also prevent overabsorption. Now, the phytonutrient on the fiber, it helps to decrease inflammation, which decreases osteoclast activity. This whole process is coordinated, it's orchestrated, and it's not just theoretical. So when we look at populations with the strongest bones and lowest fracture rates, we're still talking about Japan, rural China, and many African regions. They consume little to no dairy, but a ginormous amount of plants, especially greens, beans, and seeds. Their calcium intake often measures lower in absolute numbers, but higher in biological impact. It's like doing your math. You can be the guy who spends hours writing your proofs. The math genius next door, they potentially could solve the problem with just a few steps in a few minutes. Meanwhile, in countries with the highest dairy intake, Sweden, Finland, the United States, fracture rates remain among some of the highest in the world. And this is a paradox nobody wants to talk about. Dairy does not equal more bone strength. And for adults, dairy's benefits really plateaus sharply after childhood. And again, it's because growth plate closes and the IGF signaling no longer translates into height gain. U.S. women consume some of the highest amounts of dairy in the world, yet we have some of the highest fracture rates in the world. We push dairy milk in schools, and most of us were frankly brainwashed into thinking that we should be drinking dairy to protect our bones. And to me, it makes no sense when the majority of the world is actually lactose intolerant. And I remember my mom even telling me she was training herself to drink more dairy, despite the fact that she was lactose intolerant, because she thought it was good for her bones. The reality is that dairy in the form of milk, it does not strengthen your bone, unlike many other foods. However, dairy can help young children grow a little taller when they drink it at the right age. And that's largely through insulin-like growth factor signaling. And in general, children whose growth plates are still developing are more susceptible to grow longer, or taller, I should say. But adults, that's not the case for us, right? So milk will not help us to get stronger bones, unfortunately. And if you look around the world, in the continent of Asia, there are billions of people. Most of them don't drink dairy, and yet they have lower fracture rates than countries who consume a lot of dairy. Now, I personally never liked milk as a kid, and maybe that's why I'm not taller. I even try to eat cereal with orange juice. That doesn't taste so good. But as an adult, I'm super glad I'm not addicted to the taste of milk, and it just helps that I'm lactose intolerant. What is this prune? Calcium supplement. The white gunk that kicks your faucet, the chalk that your first grade teacher used to write on the board, and this seashell have in common. They all have calcium. But unlike this prune, everything else is made of one thing, calcium carbonate. That's right. This is pretty hard. It's insoluble, and it's designed by nature to build rigid structures, not living tissues. So here's the question we rarely stop to ask. If your calcium supplement is what forms the scale on your pipes and the chalk on the board, do you really think that swallowing more of your calcium supplement is actually what your bone needs to become stronger? Or should you be seeking answers in real food? Now, you may be wondering, so do supplements work? Maybe, but I know food works. Now, whether it's calcium carbonate, calcium citrate, calcium lactate, calcium gluconate, coral calcium, or microcrystalline hydroxyapatite, do you really think that's what's going to give you bone strength, support your skeleton, prevent fractures? Before we dive into the most powerful calcium supplements for people, I want to show you the quiet truth sitting underneath the entire conversation. Bones are not like this dead seashell. Bones are alive. Bones breathe. They remodel. They respond to hormones, inflammation, stress, immune signals, and micronutrients that are more than just calcium. Bones are not just a storage locker that simply fills up whatever mineral you drop in. Bones, they are dynamic reservoirs for minerals that include calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium. They don't just collect them, they are also constantly releasing them. So if you are not eating enough of these nutrients, you will lose bone mass. At least 50% of Americans, they don't eat enough magnesium on a daily basis. Those people are weakening their bones, drawing from their stores. About 50 to 60% of the body's total magnesium is locked in your bones, where it plays a critical but often overlooked structural and regulatory role. Magnesium is incorporated into the hydroxyapatite crystal lattice alongside calcium and phosphorus, where it helps to control crystal size, spacing, and flexibility. Magnesium prevents your bone from becoming overly rigid and brittle. So, are people suffering from fractures from walking around with low levels of magnesium no longer able to store them in their bones? Magnesium also regulates osteoclast activity. It influences your parathyroid hormone release and it's required for vitamin D activation, all of which draw on your bone stores, prevents your bones from storing magnesium. Now, when magnesium is deficient, your bones tend to form larger, more brittle mineral crystals. Your bone turnover becomes dysregulated, calcium handling worsens, and low-grade inflammation increases. Collectively, this all weakens your bone, even if your calcium intake is adequate. And over time, magnesium deficiency, that's associated with lower bone density, higher fracture risks, impaired response to calcium and vitamin D, and a greater likelihood of osteoporosis, underscoring that strong bones depend on mineral balance, not calcium alone. Bones also house bone marrow, where red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are produced, directly linking bone health to immunity and oxygen delivery. Bones also act as an endocrine organ, releasing signaling molecules like osteocalcin that influences your metabolism, your insulin sensitivity, and even your brain function. Bones constantly remodel themselves in response to your hormones, your nutrition, your inflammation, as well as your mechanical load. And this happens throughout life. And guess what? It also responds to the acidity of your diet, the health of your kidneys, your estrogen levels, even how much fiber you eat, and whether your gut microbiome ferments healthy products. That's why fracture prevention doesn't just come from calcium supplements. It comes from foods rich in calcium, magnesium, fiber, and other immune regulatory nutrients. Hence, this is probably why dairy milk does not offer fracture protection. Bone resilience comes from remodeling bone correctly through all facets of building bone. It's up to your mindset on how much you love yourself to eat what you should eat, sleep the way you should sleep, move the way you should move on a daily basis to build your bone or prevent bone loss as much as possible.
Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
But osteopenia, or low bone density, that doesn't develop overnight. It is a gradual process that usually unfolds over years to decades. Bone loss typically begins in the 30s, once peak bone mass has been reached, with an average decline of about 0.5 to 1% per year in healthy adults. Now, in certain situations, this process, of course, can be accelerated significantly when you go anti-gravity, like astronauts or being bedbound. However, you can go anti-gravity just basically sitting on your couch all day. Because anytime you don't go against gravity, your movement, then you're going to be losing bone mass. And that kind of resistance, going against gravity, that's actually helpful for us to build bone. And this is why activities like swimming doesn't build bone mass, unlike walking or running or jogging or jump roping. I mentioned earlier that the rate of bone loss is dependent upon your age. However, in women, the transition through menopause can actually lead to rapid bone loss of 2 to 5% per year for several years due to estrogen decline. And that means osteopenia can develop within 3 to 7 years of being postmenopausal. But it doesn't have to be that way. So right now, there's a lot of talk about hormone replacement therapy for women in the early years of being postmenopausal. Now, the idea is that HRT is prescribed at the lowest effective dose that controls menopausal symptoms and stabilizes bone turnover. But that ultimate decision should be between you and your provider. It needs to be individualized depending upon your personal fracture rate, your cardiovascular risk, as well as symptom burden and timing. But In reality, if you look around the world, billions of Asian women who live in Asia traditionally tolerate menopause well. They're not on HRT, they have a low fracture rate, and they live longer lives. So if you look at their lifestyle, they eat very different foods, predominantly plant-based, and they also move very differently. They move around by walking, biking, and squatting. It's all built into their daily lifestyle routine. And Asia has been traditionally a very poor continent, heavily dependent upon plant-based whole foods because those are the ones that are more affordable. And for the longest period of time, they didn't have cars or even trains conveniently for transportation. They walked and biked everywhere. Now, I visited China in 1994 with my dad, and there was almost zero cars driving on the main highways. The streets were gigantic. My cousin actually bought an old police car with a working siren, and all I saw though were people walking and biking. In those days, many houses still had dirt floors. And when I needed to use a potty, I literally had to squat. And I went back to China in 2019, and they still had those squatty potties. And this is true no matter your age, whether you're a young kid or an elderly adult. Whenever you want to do number 1 or number 2, you would have the ability to go in the bathroom and squat in like a running river. Imagine how strong their core is, how strong their bones will be, and how agile and active that you can become if you squatted every day. And today, in our modern society, we don't squat. We basically sit. We sit in our cars, sit on our toilets, sit on our couch. And then on top of that, we're not even eating whole food. We eat ultra-processed food. So we're trying to build squatting back in. When my toddlers were a kid, they actually squatted on the potties. But unfortunately, the American toilet seat is not meant for squatting because they broke the seat. In men, bone loss is usually slower, but chronic inflammation, low physical activity, nutrient deficiencies, medications like steroids, smoking, and metabolic diseases can all shorten that timeline. In more extreme cases, such as prolonged immobilization or severe malnutrition, or maybe even eating disorders or super high steroid use, that can result in measurable osteopenia within 1 or 2 years. My dad actually had severe osteoporosis due to low physical activity from being retired and living indoors, and severe vitamin D deficiency, again from being indoors. He could have taken a supplement. Nobody told him that. So he wasn't supplementing with vitamin D. And he also wasn't squatting. Squatting is a longevity exercise that billions of people around the world do. And you know why they do that every day? It's because it's required of them to go to the bathroom. Ironically, my dad, he fractured himself sitting on the toilet. And 6 months after that incident, he passed. Now, we are surrounded by food and things that have built health out of our lives. But many countries around the world still have squatty potties. It takes purpose, thought, and movement to prevent the cumulative imbalance between bone breakdown and repair over our lifetime. And part of that is to eat strategically, to eat certain foods. Foods that deliver calcium in a matrix that the body recognizes as a part of a living ecosystem. We should be eating minerals paired with fiber, phytonutrients, vitamin C, plant-based derived vitamin K, magnesium, potassium, and even natural forms of boron, all for your bone health. And these are the ingredients bone responds to. Not milligrams on a label, but a nutrient-rich environment like a whole food. But at the same time, if all you did was eat and you didn't actually use your muscles, you would lose bone mass too. That's why astronauts who go into space have to exercise and work out so hard to slow down the loss of bone mass. Now, despite what I said, people are still gonna take their calcium supplements. And this can be problematic when you use it blindly. However, if your doctor puts you on a calcium supplement, you may have special circumstances that require them. So have a heart-to-heart conversation with your medical provider before you make any changes on your food or nutrition or your supplements. Remember, folks, this is not medical advice. But here's what we now understand, that when you are taking isolated calcium without synergistic nutrients like magnesium, vitamin K, and certain plant-based acids, This can cause calcium to deposit where it doesn't belong, such as your soft tissue, your arteries, your joints, your kidneys. The body does not like excess calcium floating around. And literally, when calcium accumulates together, they become little tiny rocks. For you to absorb calcium properly and use it properly, that requires more natural form of calcium that is paired with other ingredients. Let's take a look at some of these supplements. Calcium citrate, it absorbs well, but it pushes too much calcium into your blood at once. Calcium carbonate requires stomach acid. Often it's poorly absorbed and it commonly causes constipation. How about coral calcium? It's marked as natural, yet there are no clinical evidence to suggest that it actually improves bone outcomes. Hydroxyapatite, it mimics bone structure, but it relies on your body's hormonal environment to decide where to place that calcium. The real solution is unlikely to just be in a bottle. The best supplements are actually packaged by nature. Now, I think it's time for all of us to redefine what supplementation is. I supplement with whole foods strategically so that they can actually give me lots of nutrients in my diet. And the benefit of whole food is as God has already combined calcium-rich plants with magnesium-rich foods like whole grains, beans, and leafy greens, and your gut microbiome gets fed. When that gets fed, you ferment foods and makes vitamin K1 and K2. But in addition, when you're eating whole foods, you're also getting vitamin C, important for collagen formation. And guess what? Your bones, they're made out of collagen too. And collagen only becomes activated when you have vitamin C. And that's why populations eating lots of fruits, vegetables that are high in vitamin C, such as citrus, peppers, berries, kiwi, guava, and leafy greens. Oh, and papaya too. These foods, they strengthen your bone retention. Now think about the biggest, tallest land animal on Earth. Elephants, right? Maybe giraffes? How do they grow so big? All they eat are leaves. They also don't eat foods packed with sodium. High sodium diets actually increase calcium loss because it makes you pee it out. And this is one of the mechanisms explaining why processed foods, chips, fast food, and boxed meals, they are so devastating to our bone health. They're simply draining the calcium regardless how much you ingest. So one of the simplest ways to protect your bones is to lower your salts. And when you eat leafy greens and beans, you are raising another salt, potassium, that is greatly needed. 99% of the population, they do not eat enough potassium on a daily basis. Now let's turn to one more hidden factor, protein. We have a protein obsession. Have you noticed? But not all proteins are equal. Animal protein increases acid load, which leads to calcium leaching from their bones. It makes them actually weaker. Plant proteins, however, comes packaged with potassium and alkaline minerals that protect the bone. That's also another logical reason why plant protein predominant cultures have lower fracture rates. Absolutely. And I know hormones matter too. Now, estrogen maintains osteoblast activity. When estrogen drops in menopause, bone loss accelerates. But women who consume a high antioxidant, high fiber-rich diet, a high phytonutrient-rich diet, they see slower declines. Their gut microbiota also break down plant fibers into estrobiomodulating metabolites that help to stabilize estrogen metabolism. Now, equally important is not to have too much estrogen. And Asian diets, it's just associated with a higher intake of soy, isoflavones, and fibers, which increases sex hormone binding globulin and favor conversion of estrogen toward less biologically aggressive metabolites, while also enhancing fecal estrogen excretion through the gut. Now, Western diets, by contrast, are linked to lower fiber intake, higher insulin levels, alter gut microbiota, and increased reabsorption of estrogen via extrahepatic circulations, resulting in higher effective estrogen exposure in the tissue despite not being on HRT. These diet differences may explain why Asian populations historically have less estrogen-driven conditions like breast cancer. The day-to-day foundation of your bone health will be in your movement and in food. But it's not just in any food. It's in calcium-rich, plant-dense foods that your ancestors ate. Collards, turnip greens, bok choy, kale, mustard greens, navy beans, black-eyed peas, almonds, chia seeds, sesame seeds, and prunes. These foods, they don't just give you calcium, they give your body the instructions of how to use that calcium. And if you want to learn more about powerful foods, watch the next video.